we are going to start off our service by recognizing a couple of our graduates. We got a high school graduate that'll be finishing up school in a couple weeks, and a college graduate. I'm going to invite y'all to come on up and join me up here. And if you could just stand on this side of me. Um, all right. Junior, could you? We got a little picture up here of you. All right. And so, can you tell us a little bit about the school you went to and what you're hoping to do next after school?
I went to Canfield High School for 4 years. I want to be an auto mechanic after high school, or somewhere in that field of a technician.
All right, awesome. And we have a gift for you right here. If you could slide over towards me just a hair. And then we got a picture for Sam also up here on the screen. And Sam, can you tell us a little bit about your schooling and what you're hoping to do next?
I went to Southern New Hampshire University for 5 years, and I finally got my bachelor's in healthcare administration. I plan to stay where I'm at, hopefully, and just get more money that way. And my next plan is to get my daughter through high school and graduate.
Awesome. And we have this gift for you. Inside your bags, you're welcome to go ahead and open them now if you'd like. In that comes next, Junior. I'll get to that in just a second. So in your bags, we have a journal for you guys, and so we hope you use those things to just talk to God about your plans and thoughts, and hopefully God answers some of those prayers and your goals that you put in there for your life. And then there's also a book in there called God's Promises for Everyday Life, I believe is the title of it. And so no matter what season of life, it has like different topics or feelings that you could experience through the different seasons of your life. And we'll be talking about some of those today during our message. And it's a really cool book. It points you to some scriptures to encourage you no matter what season of life you're in. So we hope you enjoy those and use those things wisely. So thank y'all so much for staying up here today. All right. So, and I was thinking about our graduation and the different seasons of life we go through or expect to go through in our life, and I was thinking about the game of life, and so that's the title of my sermon today is the game of life. And game night in our house is always interesting because me and my wife play games very differently, to the point where it can almost frustrate each other. We enjoy playing board games. We enjoy playing board games together, but picking the board game has to be very specific and intentional. So I like to play games where you like plan and have a strategy and like you think through your choices really well. And my wife likes games of chance. And so what happens is most of the time we play games where chance is involved. And um, my wife is very lucky and fortunate in these games. And I'm like, well, I'm rolling a one every time, so I don't have a chance. And she's rolling exactly what she needs to find success. And so I was thinking about this, and in this game of life that I'm sure most of us have played or at least heard of, it goes through these different seasons and choices in our life where, we get out of high school and we can either start a career, we can go to school, and after that we get married and we buy a house and we have kids. Like all these things are the typical thoughts or experience of growing through, and eventually you'll get a raise or a better job along the way, trying to avoid extra taxes or expenses where you can. And we end up eventually hopefully being able to buy a larger house to fit all the things we accumulate. And at the end of it all, we all end up in the same end goal, which should be the finish right over here, right there. And we are judge a successful life based on how much we accumulate along the way. So like in life, for example, you're trying to save up your money, earn money, and get these life tiles that are like your bonuses at the end of the life to determine who is the most successful, who the winner is in life. And so as I was thinking about this game of life, there's a story in the Bible. This is the story of Joseph. it can be found in Genesis chapter 37 as well as 39 through 50. So it's a large chunk of Genesis, many chapters. And I was thinking about how Joseph's story can kind of be applied to this idea of us going through this game of life. And so we're going to look at that today. We're not going to cover 12 chapters of the Bible in our service today. I'll have you all here till 3 o'clock if we did that. But I'm going to highlight some things and paraphrase. And I want you to know, like, I'm not making this stuff up. This stuff is in the Bible. These things happened and are recorded in Genesis. So if you find these stories interesting today, I encourage you to go check out these chapters, Genesis 37 and 39 through 50, because it's all in there. I'm not making this up, okay? And so, and again, relating to this game of life, I'm sitting here thinking about, if you're not familiar with Joseph's family, he is one of 12 sons. Joseph was one of 12 sons, children of Jacob, sons of Jacob. And there's a lot of dynamics happening there. And as you read through Joseph's story, he's the brother who spun and landed on one every single time playing the board game, but somehow when he gets to the end of the game, he's still on top. And that's because he lived a life focused on God and God's plan for him. So I'm going to get into the scripture. We're going to start out in chapter 37, verses 3 through 8. Starting in verse 3, it says, Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. All right, so already we got some interesting dynamics happening in the house of Jacob. All right, dad had a favorite in the house. Everybody knew it, and Joseph was that favorite. And so a little bit more to the dynamics of that is Jacob had multiple wives, and Joseph was the firstborn son of Rebekah, who was the wife that Jacob truly loved. All right, so there's lots of dynamics happening there. You know, we all have a lot happening in our personal lives some days, and there's a lot happening in the household of this person of Joseph growing up here. All right, verse 5. One night Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field trying to tie up bundles of grain. Suddenly my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. So he had this dream, and he's trying to share this dream because he's like, what does this mean? Like, I've never had a dream like this. And just keep this in perspective. Joseph is the 11th out of 12 sons. So he's the second to the youngest. And he comes to the breakfast table, and he's like, hey, I just had a dream last night where I'm going to be, all you guys are going to be coming to me in need of help. And I'm going to be like in charge and ruling over things. So obviously if you're familiar with having boys, that's not going to go over well with the other, at least 10 of them that are older, right? Because they're like, there's a pecking order here, right? So Joseph's just trying to figure out what his dream means, and his brothers are upset that they could possibly that he would possibly have the idea that he could ever possibly be in charge of them, right? Because there's a very clear structure in their society at this time. It's the father is the head of the household. That's not ever going to be in question. And then the oldest brother is the next responsible. He would be the main one to inherit, and then he would be the responsible one after his father has passed. So the idea that the 11th born son of the family would be the one in charge is just mind-blowing. Not received very well. He also has another dream at this point, and this includes his parents, and he's sharing this, and even Jacob at this point is not very happy about this dream, where he's having a similar dream where all of them are going to Joseph in need. And so right now his brothers, even his dad's not receiving these dreams super well, even though he's the favorite son. And it gets to a place where these brothers are planning to kill him, because it came to that point where they're like, we cannot have our brother thinking he's better than all of us. Like, if we get him out the way, then we'll at least have, a better shot at our father's affections, right? And so it gets to the place where they're like, we want to kill him, but then they come to reason and they're like, we're not going to become murderers over this idea that over our brother, but they do trick him into being trapped, and they instead sell him into slavery and made their father believe that he had died. All right. So in this game of life, Joseph's like growing up, he's a teenager and life is good. The father is like set him apart. He's like, you're the golden child, you're the best of my sons. And now he's set back, he's sold into slavery. That's a major setback in this game of life. So he's having a hard time. He's not going to be able to get ahead in this game of life between him and his brothers. His brothers do this because they're like, if we don't set him back, then none of us will ever be able to get ahead in this game of life. All right. And then we're going to go to chapter 39, starting in verse 2. This is after he's been enslaved. The Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did, as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. So he was taken to Egypt, sold into slavery there. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. This pleased Potiphar, so he soon made Joseph his personal attendant, and he put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. From the day Joseph was put in charge of his master's household and the property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. All his household and affairs ran smoothly, and his crops and livestock flourished. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. So Joseph had this setback, but he still relied on God. He didn't turn away from God. He relied on God. And even in this unfortunate circumstance, he put himself in the best possible, in the highest possible position he could have been attained as being a slave. So he made the best of it. He didn't just be like, okay, life's over, I'm just going to try and get to the finish line, of life as a slave, and life's never going to get better than this. No, he worked really hard, and he attained the highest position he could in the circumstance, and God allowed him to be blessed and elevated because he relied on God. All right, so as this story continues in 39, the story doesn't stop there. Life doesn't just stay good for Joseph from this point forward. At this point, Potiphar's wife began to take notice. They've got this young man who's really good at everything he does, working around their household. And in verse 6b, I think we have that up on the screen, the scriptures describe him as handsome and well-built. All right, so Potiphar is away from home, and the wife is like, I'm starting to be attracted to you, I'm interested in you, but Joseph refuses her advances. But the wife claims that he tried to attack her, and so it's the wife's word against the word of a slave, and so Joseph was now thrown in jail. All right, this is another setback. So as soon as you think it's bad being a slave, then he's elevated to a high position through relying on God and working, and now he's experienced another setback. He's thrown into jail. And this is what our lives are like. We go and we set out, and we think that, we're going to hopefully succeed in everything we do, but then sometimes, when we roll that dice, when we spin that spinner in the game of life, for example, we just need to hit that number 10, and instead we land on 1. And so that's what just keeps happening to Joseph here. As soon as he thinks he's getting ahead, that wrong number is rolled, and it just sets him back even further. All right, so this is now while he's in jail. We're in Genesis 40 now, starting in verse 5. It says, while they were in prison, the Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they both looked upset. Why do you look so worried? He asked them. And so what happens prior to these verses is Joseph's in jail, but again, he's getting elevated to a position. He's actually asked to be put in charge of Pharaoh's cupbearer and the baker while they're in prison and take care of them, which is a job that you had been tasked with if you were in a position of authority. So even as a prisoner in jail, Joseph is making the best of it. He has his responsibility and authority. So even in these unfortunate circumstances, Joseph's not quitting. He's making the best of whatever situation God has given him in the moment. And so he has this opportunity with the cupbearer and the baker. In verse 8, it says, they replied, we both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean. And Joseph replies to them, "Interpreting dreams is God's business," Joseph replied. "Go ahead and tell me your dreams." So Joseph helps them with their dreams. That's something special about Joseph. He had always had dreams, even when it caused a problem in his home. And he had been given this gift by God to interpret and understand these dreams at this point. So he helps the cupbearer, and in exchange for helping the cupbearer, he also interprets the baker, but the baker's dream isn't as fortunate as the cupbearer's. And the cupbearer was supposed to put in a good word for Joseph when he got out and got back into Pharaoh's service. But the cupbearer got out of jail, and he's like, I'm so glad to be out of jail and going about my life, that he completely forgot about Joseph and that he was meant to help him. And so even when Joseph's like, all right, maybe this is an opportunity for me to get somewhere, he just stays exactly where he's at. He doesn't seem to be able to get very far in life again. At this example, as soon as things are starting to look up, another setback. So, and the same thing happens, as we're going through this board game, as we're traveling through the path of life, this is Joseph just hitting a road bump every chance he gets. He's spinning, and every worst case outcome is what he's landing on at this point. So then, and this is going to be in chapter 41. 2 years later, the Pharaoh had dreams that no one could help him with, and finally the cupbearer remembered Joseph. So 2 years later, after this deal was made, Joseph had helped out the cupbearer. Cupbearer went about his life. Joseph spends another 2 years in jail after this moment, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I know this guy Joseph. He's in prison. I was supposed to help him 2 years ago, but I forgot, and he might be able to help you out, Pharaoh." So nobody else was able to help Pharaoh at this point. It brings Joseph. Joseph interprets these dreams. The dreams meant that a great famine was coming to the land of Egypt, and they had the time to prepare. It was going to be this season of bounty and surplus for Egypt, followed by the season of famine. All right, so they needed to prepare. If they didn't have this dream interpreted, then Egypt would have struggled through this season of famine. They would have think everything was great, everything is good, we're getting so much food, and they would have just been eating it all. And then famine would have struck, and they would have been starving and without food. And so Pharaoh was so pleased with Joseph in this moment that he chose him for the responsibility of preparing Egypt. So Joseph, in this moment, goes from a man that is in prison and serving faithfully in whatever season God has him, to now he's elevated to a position working for Pharaoh, which is the leader, essentially the president of Egypt at this time, kind of to put it in today's terms. And then this is in Genesis 41. I'm going to read 41 through 46. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand, placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen clothing, hung a gold chain around his neck. Then he had Joseph ride the chariot reserved for the second in command. And whenever Joseph went, the command was shouted, "Kneel down." So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all of Egypt. The Pharaoh said to him, "I am Pharaoh, but no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval." Verse 45, then Pharaoh gave Joseph a new Egyptian name, and I'm not going to try and pronounce that, but it's right there in verse 45. And he also gave him a wife, and it lists her name there. She was the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On. So Joseph took charge of the entire land of Egypt. And in 46, he was 30 years old when he began serving in the court of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And when Joseph left Pharaoh's presence, he inspected the entire land of Egypt. All right, so now at 30 years old, he goes from no prospects, he goes from being a slave and a prisoner to now he's second in command of the entire nation of Egypt. He went from nothing to now he's got the nice job, the nice house, the nice car, a wife. And in this moment, he went from all these setbacks to having more than most people could dream of at this time. All right, he's got nice clothes too. The Pharaoh made sure he was well taken care of. And I'm just thinking, so he's like back here, right? He hasn't even gotten married yet. His roles have been so bad. He's all the way back here. His brothers are like, we got him, wool pulled over his eyes. They're halfway done with the game. And I've played games of life like that. And at that point, I'm just like, I'm trying not to be frustrated, and I'm just trying to get to the end of it without being too embarrassed. Like, I don't want to be playing this game for 15 minutes after everybody else is done playing, counting up their money. And so at this moment, Joseph's, he's got the wife, he's got the house, he's got the car, he's got the job, and he's launched way ahead of all of his brothers. His brothers don't know where he's at this point, but his brothers thought they were getting over on him and thought they were way ahead. But really, Joseph had been relying on God and doing things God's way this whole time, and it pushed him far ahead of where he could have possibly imagined to be at that time, or anyone really could be. So. And again, like I said, if that were me, I'd be back there being like, let me just get through this game without being the only one sitting here at the table still after everybody else is finished. So 7 years after the famine began, his brothers and his family back home had to go to Egypt for food because they were experiencing the same famine that was foretold in the dream. And they didn't know what had become of their brother, but it was just in Joseph's hands to determine if they would get food or not. So I think this is just awesome how God works. Like, Joseph's been faithful, treated awful by his family, slave, prison, now in charge of Egypt. And his brothers don't recognize him at this point. And Joseph recognizes them immediately. And he's like, these are my brothers coming and asking for food. And the last thing I got from them is a trip to Egypt. And I haven't had a great life up until, I had this encounter with Pharaoh. And so he gives them a hard time. He doesn't let them right off the hook. He's not like, my brothers. He's not recognized. And he gives them a hard time. He asks them to do some things he knew would be really difficult for them. But he's like, really struggling with, like, how do I treat my brothers knowing what they've done to me, but I've been doing things God's way this whole time, and God has taken care of not just me, but he's given me the opportunity to take care of my entire family. Because if Joseph hadn't been sold into slavery and been in prison and then had the opportunity to serve Pharaoh in this way, he'd be along with his brothers on this journey to Egypt to ask for food, and his family may or may not have been taken care of, but now it's in his hands to see that his family is cared for. In Genesis 45, verses 1 through 3, it says, Joseph could not stand it any longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, out all of you. So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. Then he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians could hear him, and the word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. He says in verse 3, I am Joseph. He said to his brothers, is my father still alive? So he loved his father. He hadn't heard anything first from his father, known anything about his family up until his brothers. But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. So they're just in complete shock. Like, they've been doing these things, and they're like, I don't know how we're going to do this because, our father's not going to be too happy with us if we do these things. But Joseph knew all that, so he was giving them a hard time. But in this moment, Joseph was finally like, look, y'all are my brothers, and I just want to know about my dad and, like, how things are going. And then, again, Joseph's in this position of authority, well-respected in Egypt. In verse 16, it says, the news soon reached Pharaoh's palace. Joseph's brothers have arrived. Pharaoh and his officials were all delighted to hear this because they're like, Joseph's done these awesome things for Egypt. We want to receive his family and take good care of them. So the result of this is not just that his family got food, but also a large space of land for their people to come and live in Egypt and be taken care of and provided for through this season of life. So in every season of Joseph's life, he chooses to live for God and give his best in each season, as a son, as a slave, as a prisoner, and serving to his best ability in each of those seasons led him to having the power and authority of ruling an entire nation, only behind the ruler of that nation, Pharaoh. And so what I want you guys to take from this are graduates as you're beginning to choose the next path of life, as well as each and every one of us as we go through these different paths of life and make choices, is that a life lived for God always leads to success. If you choose your next when as you choose your next path for life, choose the path that leads to a closer relationship with God. And so I want to pray for us, and that's what I have for you guys today. And I'm just thankful for you guys to join us today, and we're glad to be able to celebrate you guys today. And I just hope that, as we think about our choices in life, it's really no different than this board game. But the important thing is when we choose the path that leads to God, it's always going to lead to greater success in our life. Even when we feel like we're behind, even if we think we're ahead, but we might not really be ahead, choosing the path that leads to God is always going to lead us to success in life. All right, let's pray, guys. God, we're so thankful for all that you do and all that you bless in this ministry and all those that are here, Lord. We're excited for the ways that you work in our life, Lord, even when we don't fully understand why you've put us in the situations or the circumstances you've led us into, Lord. And God, as we consider seasons of change in life and the next steps of our life, God, we may think we are trying to get ahead, and sometimes we don't always get the outcome we expect, God. We know that you have authority and control in our life and are determining things far greater than we could even understand, God. And Lord, we pray that when things may not go our way in our life, that we can remember Joseph and how no matter what the circumstance was, God, he led and walked towards you and worked and made the best of any circumstance he was put in, and how much greater of life that can lead to in following you, God. And we're just so thankful to be here today, God, and